So having explained consumers equilibrium, in the case of single commodity, so in this lecture we will, turn into explaining the consumer's equilibrium when he has to spend his money income on two commodities. So we have discussed consumer's equilibrium in case of one commodity only. So in this lecture we will discuss in case of two commodities. So consumer has a given income which has to spend on good X and good Y, so two goods. So how will he allocate his money income between these two goods? That is to say, what would be his equilibrium position, in respect of the purchase of these two goods? How will a consumer attain his equilibrium position while consuming his, two goods, or while spending his income on two goods? So here we are having, the assumption that a consumer is again rational. That means he will try to maximize his, utility by spending the amount of money that he has. He will try to maximize his, total, utility or satisfaction. And again here, a consumer is driven or governed by, three factors when making this, consumption. So it is governed by the, marginal utilities of the goods. A consumer is governed by three factors. One is marginal utility of the goods. Second one is price of the two goods. And lastly, his money income. So these are the two, constraints or the two factors that is governing consumers' behavior. So what is a consumer's equilibrium in case of two commodities? So the consumer will maximize his total utility when he distributes his money, income among all the goods, that is, two goods, in such a way that the utility derived from the last rupee spent on each good is equal. So he is in an equilibrium position when he, try to maximize his utility while distributing his money income among all the goods in such a way that the utility derived from the last rupee that he spends on its good is equal. So that is the condition where a consumer will be in equilibrium. So in a two commodity case, assuming that a consumer has a given money income and that he is rational, a consumer will attain a equilibrium position when he maximizes his total utility, in distributing his money income among all the goods, that is good X and good Y in case of two commodities, in such a way that, the utility that he derives from the last rupee spent on each good X and good Y is equal or is same. A consumer is in equilibrium position when marginal utility of the last rupee spent on each good is the same. So this is commonly known as the law of equi-marginal utility. So marginal utility of a rupee spent, or marginal utility of a rupee spent on good, must equal the marginal utility of the good divided by its price. So in case of, law of equi-marginal utility, the marginal utility of a rupee spent on good is equal to the marginal utility of the good divided by its price. So in symbol we have marginal utility equals marginal utility of, marginal utility derived from good X divided by price of the good X. Where MUM is the marginal utility of a rupee, and then MUX is the marginal utility of good X, and PX is the price of good X. So this is a situation of law of equi marginal utility, where marginal utility of a rupee equals marginal utility of good X divided by price of good X. That is a position where we have the equi marginal utility. So for two commodity, let us say good X and good Y, a consumer is in equilibrium when MUX PX equals MUY PY. So marginal utility of good X divided by price of X must equal the marginal utility of good Y divided by price of Y. So which means that the last marginal utility derived from the last rupee spent on good X and good Y must equal. So in short, the utility derived in spending the last rupee of money on both the good must equal. That is good X and good Y. So that is the situation of equilibrium. So now if MUX PX is greater than MUY PY, what will happen? Then the consumer will substitute good X for good Y until MUX PX becomes equal to MUY PY. So what are we trying to say here? When MUX PX is greater than MUY PY, which means that they are not in equilibrium. So in that case, a consumer will substitute good X for good Y until and unless MUX PX again is equal to MUY PY. So when MUX PX becomes equal to MUY PY, and then the consumer will be again in equilibrium position. So it has to be equal if a consumer has to attain equilibrium position, and it cannot be greater or MUX PX MUY PY must be equal. It could not be greater or should not be lesser. Here, when we talk about substitution of good X for good Y, we are, saying that, for example, you are deriving more utility from, one particular good and less utility from another good, then, you will substitute that good which you are deriving more utility for the good which you are deriving less utility. So, substitution happens if both are not equal. But this situation or this position of MUX PX equals MUY PY, it can be attained or achieved at different levels of money expenditure. And it is not only at one level that this position is achieved. So, how far a consumer, will consume, or how far does a consumer go on purchasing the goods he wants, is determined by the size of his money income. So this equilibrium position is attained at different level and not at single level. So the amount or how far the consumer will go on purchasing that good that he wants is constrained or determined by his income. So with a given money expenditure on a good, a consumer will derive some utility from it. So now the consumer will go on purchasing goods until the marginal utility of the last rupees spent on each of the good is equal, and he has fully spent his money income. So in case of equilibrium position, a consumer purchases goods until the marginal utility of the last rupees spent on each good becomes equal, and he is using his money income to the fullest. He has already fully spent his money income. So thus a consumer will be in equilibrium position when the following equation holds true. That is, MUX divided by PX equals MUY divided by PY equals MUM. And we have, explain what is MUX, PX, MUY, PY, and MUM. So it is at this, equation or position that a consumer will be in equilibrium in case of two commodities. Given his money income and then consumer being rational. That is the position of a consumer's equilibrium in case of two commodities. So let us see the illustration of consumer's equilibrium in case of two commodities. So we shall show or prove the equilibrium condition in the form of tabular form or even in a graphical form. So here we are, in table 3 we are, seeing the marginal utilities of good X and good Y. So these are the units. And here we are giving the marginal utility of good X. And in the third column we are giving the marginal utility of Y. That is the utils. So here we are assuming that, price of good X is rupees 2. And the price of good Y is rupees 3. So, and again, consumer has to spend rupees 24. That is our assumption for this illustration. And it is important to note that, a consumer cannot equate his marginal utility of the goods, of the two goods, because the price of the two goods are different. But what we have to equate here, a consumer will equate the marginal utilities of the last rupee spent. So it is the marginal utilities of the last rupee that is spent on these two goods. So in other words, he will equate MUX PX with MUY PY. So it is not the marginal utilities alone, but the marginal utilities of the last rupee spent on these two goods that the consumer will try to equate. So in table number 4, we have, found out the marginal utility of a rupee. How do we find out marginal utility of a rupee for good X is, 20 divided by 2. So 20 is the marginal utility of good X and 2 is the price of good X. So 20 divided by 2. 20 divided by price of good is 10. So we got that like this. For marginal utility of good Y, so we are dividing marginal utility of good Y by price of good Y. So 24 by 3. 3 is the price of good Y if we have assumed. So we get 8. And so that is how we got all the marginal utility of a rupee. So by looking at table number 4, what can you see? What can you observe? So by looking at this table, it will become clear that, MUXPX is equal to 5 utils, when he is consuming 6 unit of good. 6 unit of good X. And again, MUYPY is, equal to 5 utils when he is consuming 4 unit of good Y. And by consuming at this 4 unit of good X and 6 unit of good X and 4 unit of good Y, he is spending his total money income, that is rupees 24. 6 4s are 24, 4 6 are 24. So at this, utility level of both the good, consuming 6 unit of good X and 4 unit of good Y, a consumer is, spending all his money income, that is rupees 24. So therefore, the consumer will be in equilibrium, when he is buying 6 unit of good X and 4 unit of good Y and spending his money income of rupees, 24. So 2 into 6 plus 3 into 4. So when we add up, it is 24. 2 6 are 12, 3 4s are 12. So it is rupees 24. He is spending his total money income when he is buying 6 units of good X and 4 unit of good Y. So that is the consumer equilibrium point. So MUX PX equals 5 utils in 6 units of goods. MUY PY equals 5 utils at 4th unit of good, as I have explained here. So our equilibrium position where he maximizes utility would be MUX PX equals MUY PY equals MUM. So that is the equilibrium position that we have to check when he maximizes utility in consuming both the goods. So we have seen MUX PX is 10 by 2, MUY PY 15 by 3. So when we calculate, we got 5. So 5, therefore 5 is the marginal utility, of the last rupee spent on each of the two goods he purchased. That is, rupees 5 is the, marginal utility of the last rupee, which is same for both the goods. So consumer's equilibrium, is graphically represented in figure number 2. So graphically we have represented the consumer's equilibrium in case of two goods, two commodities. Since the marginal utility curve of goods slopes downward, so curves depicting MUX PX and MUY PY will also slope downward. So thus when we see the diagram, when a consumer is buying 6 unit of good X, that is OH, and 4 units of good Y, that is OK, a consumer is in equilibrium, and we have the situation of MUX PX equals MUY divided by PY equals MUM. So that is the equilibrium position. Therefore, the consumer is in equilibrium when he is buying 6 unit of X and 4 unit of Y, and no other allocation of money expenditure will give him greater utility than when he is buying 6 unit of good X and 4 unit of good Y. Suppose, let's take a condition or situation. The consumer buys 1 unit less of good X. Let us say a consumer is buying 5 unit, that is 1 unit less he is buying from the equilibrium position. Let us say 5 unit of good X he is buying. So, and 1 more unit of good Y. So from 4 unit he is buying 1 more unit of good Y. So this is the condition that we have to explain. A consumer is taking 1 less unit of good X and 1 more unit of good Y. So when we compare, or when we are seeing, or when we are rearranging the purchase of a commodity for the two types of good, that is good X and good Y, we will see that when a consumer is buying 1 less unit of good X, the total loss is indicated by A, B, C, H. So that is the loss that he incurs by buying 1 less unit of good X. And in case of good Y, he is buying 1 more unit of good Y. So when he is buying 1 more unit of good Y, the total gain that he gets is equal to KEFL. So when we compare this loss and gain, that is the shaded part, we can see that the shaded area of the loss is bigger than the amount of utility that he gains. So loss, or ABCH, is greater than KEFL. So the loss is greater when he is rearranging his purchase. That is, rearranging in a way that he is purchasing 1 less unit of good X and 1 more unit of good Y. So he is rearranging his purchase, and in the mean of rearranging his purchase, the loss that he gets is greater than the gain that he gets. So it is only at 6 units of good X and fourth unit of good Y that a consumer will attain equilibrium in case of two commodities. So we have discussed about consumer's equilibrium in case of two commodities. So in case of a multi-commodity case, the equilibrium position will hold true in this equation: MUX PX equals MUY PY equals MUZ PZ equals MUM. So what are some of the basic limitations of law of equi-marginal utility? So number one, it says that consumers are generally governed by habits and customs, and ordinary consumers are not so rational, and they are not calculative. So what purchase or what type of goods they buy does not depend generally on the utility that they derive, but it is governed by habits and customs. Number two, it is not possible for a consumer to measure utility cardinally. So in cardinal terms, utility is not possible to measure. So some of the economists have suggested ordinal measurement of utility, like J.R. Hicks, Allen, all those. They have suggested ordinal utility analysis, which makes use of those indifference curves. And the last limitation is indivisibility of certain goods. So another limitation of the law of equi-marginal utility is found in case of indivisibility of certain goods. Goods are often available in large indivisible units because the goods are indivisible. So it is not possible to equate the marginal utility of money spent on them. Thus, indivisibility of certain goods is a great obstacle in the way of equalization of the marginal utility of a rupee from different commodities. It is the indivisibility of certain goods that we are not able to equalize the marginal utility of a rupee from different commodities, because the utility that you get in buying a car or in buying a rice bag is completely different, and we cannot equate the utility of that money. So these are some of the limitations of equi-marginal utility. And with this, we have come to the end of chapter number 3, that is theory of consumers' behavior.